This pond right here fed 5 people through winters, when the store shelves were empty and the money was emptier still. Look at it close. Chickens up on those stilts. Ducks paddling right there on the water. Fish underneath, fat and healthy. Fruit trees along that fence line, and a vegetable patch just past them. No feed truck ever came down this road. No sack of chemical fertilizer ever touched this water. And yet every single one of those animals, and everything growing around them, had food enough all year long. Neither did the family that raised them ever go hungry. Stick with me, because what I'm about to walk you through took my grandfather years to figure out, and I don't want it to disappear the way so much of this old knowledge already has. My name's Walt Higgins. I was raised on a farm my grandfather built with his own 2 hands, back in a time when there wasn't a dollar to waste, and there wasn't a scrap of food to waste either. My father grew up working that same ground before I ever did, and everything I know because it was handed down to me the same way, one generation showing the next, out in the field, not out of some book. What I'm going to show you today isn't a modern idea dressed up to look old-fashioned. It's the real thing, a system my grandfather built out of pure necessity, where 3 different animals and a whole garden of plants fed each other, so that he barely had to buy feed for any of them, and barely had to buy food for us either. Stay with me, and I'll walk you through the whole thing piece by piece, just the way my father walked me through it. Now, before I get into it, I've taken every one of these old methods my grandfather used, not just this pond system, but the root cellar, the canning, the Victory Garden layout, all of it. And I've written it all down in one place so you don't have to go hunting for it piece by piece the way I did over the years. It's called the Depression-Era Survival Manual, and the link is right below this video if you'd like to keep a copy of it for your own kitchen table. Now let's get down to that pond, because there's a lot to show you. See, nowadays if a family wants to keep chickens, they drive to town and buy a 50-pound sack of feed. If they want fish, that's a different sack, different aisle, different price. Ducks, same story all over again. 3 separate costs, 3 separate trips, and money my grandfather's family flat out did not have to spend 3 times over. He didn't look at his land and see 3 separate animals needing 3 separate bags of feed. He looked at it and saw one whole system, where what one animal left behind was exactly what the next one needed to eat. That's not some clever trick. That's just refusing to let anything go to waste a habit this country seems to have lost somewhere along the way, and one I think we'd all do well to remember. Grandpa dug that pond in the lowest corner of the property, right where the rainwater already gathered every spring anyway. No sense fighting the land when the land's already telling you where the water wants to sit. In that pond, he kept 3, sometimes 4 kinds of fish, and he did that on purpose, because each kind fed at a different depth of the water. The ones that stayed near the top caught whatever scraps floated down first. The ones in the middle picked up what drifted past them. And the bottom feeders, the catfish and the like, they cleaned up whatever settled down there, so nothing ever sat and rotted at the bottom of that pond. Now here's the part that always surprises folks. Right above one edge of the water, Grandpa built that little coop up on stilts, hanging out just far enough that the birds' droppings fell straight down into the pond below. I know that sounds like a strange thing to be proud of, but Grandpa knew exactly what that meant. It meant free calcium and free feed for every fish in that water, without a single sack ever leaving the barn. He used to tell my father that a fish getting that calcium never grows soft, never grows sickly, the way so many farmers' fish did back then. It grows fast, and it grows strong, same as a chicken, raised the right way on the right ground. Then there were the ducks, right out on the open water, and those birds were doing 3 jobs at once, though most folks driving past would have only seen one. First, their paddling stirred air down into that pond, so the fish underneath always had oxygen enough to breathe easy, even on the stillest, hottest days of August. Second, their droppings added even more feed into that water, on top of what the chickens above were already giving. And third, the one Grandma loved best of all 30-some ducks meant a full basket of eggs waiting most every morning, rain or shine. Between those ducks and the hens up in that coop, this farm never once went a week without eggs, enough to feed the family and still have extra to sell or trade for something else they needed in town. My grandmother used to say that basket of eggs was the closest thing to a regular paycheck that farm ever saw, and in a hard year that meant more than most people today could ever understand. But Grandpa didn't stop at the water's edge. All around that pond, he planted fruit trees, apple, pear, whatever would take root in that soil, because he said no patch of ground on this farm was allowed to sit there doing nothing. Between those trees, he kept a garden going too. Corn, beans, squash, whatever the season called for, and he watered every bit of it by hand, carried straight up from that same pond. Off past the garden, my grandmother kept a milk cow, and that cow tied the whole thing together in a way I didn't understand until I was much older. The manure from that cow, and the droppings the chickens and ducks left on dry ground, all went into one compost pile out behind the barn. That compost fed the garden and the fruit trees. The garden and the trees fed the family, and whatever the family couldn't eat, the animals finished off. Nothing on that farm ever traveled more than a few hundred feet before it found its next use. So by the time you added it up, eggs from the coop, fish from the pond, milk from that cow, vegetables from the garden, fruit from the trees along the fence. This small stretch of land was feeding a family of 5 or 6 people almost entirely on its own, with hardly a dollar spent at the store from one season to the next. Now, Grandpa didn't land on this all in one year. My father told me he tried a handful of different setups before he settled on the one I just showed you. Here's how he ranked them. Best to worst. Coop built directly over the pond. Garden and fruit trees ringing the water 5 out of 5. Nothing wasted, nothing carried further than it had to be. And everything on that farm grew faster and stronger for it. Ducks kept loose on the water full time. 4 out of 5. Wonderful for the eggs. Wonderful for keeping that water breathing. Though Grandma still had to walk the bank most mornings hunting down nests, hidden in the reeds. Compost pile too far from the garden. 3 out of 5. Grandpa learned that one the hard way. Carry manure too far, and a man starts skipping the chore altogether, and then the whole system falls behind. Feeding the fish, the fowl, and the cow separately, the way most farms around here did it, 2 out of 5. More buckets, more walking, more waste sitting around at the end of every single day. Grandpa tried it his very first year and swore he'd never go back to it again. Buying feed and fertilizer from town for everything, 1 out of 5. He only did that once. The winter he simply couldn't afford not to, and he always called it the leanest, hungriest year that farm ever saw. Before Grandpa pulled all of this together, the farm bled money every single week, feed here, fertilizer there, and barely enough left over for the family table by Saturday night. But the year he finally built the pond, the coop, the ducks, and the garden the way I've just shown you, my father said the change wasn't slow. It wasn't a little bit better one month and a little bit better the next, the way most folks expect these things to go. It was heavy spending, still heavy, and then almost nothing at all. By the second month, not one more sack of feed left through that farm gate. The fish grew fat on what the birds gave them for free. The chickens and ducks never wanted for scraps out of that garden. The cow had all the pasture and compost she needed close by. And by that winter, the only things that farm bought from town, the whole season through, were salt, thread, and a little bit of coffee for Grandpa. This is the kind of thinking that carried families like mine clean through the hardest years this country's ever seen. Not one scrap wasted, not one drop of water carried further than it needed to go. Not one animal fed a dollar's worth of anything it could have earned for free, right there on the same piece of ground. My grandfather taught my father this, my father taught it to me, and now I'm handing it down to you, because I don't want knowledge like this to die out quiet, the way it nearly has already. Next time, I'll take you down into the root cellar my grandmother swore by, the one that kept a whole winter's worth of vegetables fresh clean through to April, with no electricity, no refrigeration, nothing but good cold ground and a little know-how. Stay close, because that one might just be the most useful thing I show you all year.